How's it going, everyone? If you're watching this, you've stumbled across my channel, Sam Shady Sports. I'm fairly new to this, but I wanted to take the time to thank you for watching this video. If you like what you see slash hear, drop a like, subscribe for future football-related content. Today we're discussing the head coaching openings around the NFL. Um, Prior to this week, there were only 8 available. I was skeptical that any more would have developed by now, but as you might know by now, Sean Payton stepped down in New Orleans, a move that most people did not see coming. He says he's retiring, but I have my doubts that this retirement will last long. I honestly think that this might have more to do with the situation in New Orleans that he faces in 2022 than it does his lack of desire to continue coaching. I think New Orleans kind of burned him out after a season in which he dealt with injuries at the quarterback position to such extent that he was forced to start what would have amounted to his fourth string quarterback when the season began in Ian Book. Naturally, Mickey Loomis, almost in panic mode, immediately went to candidates he knew, as most GMs would in this situation. The first person on that interview list was Dennis Allen, the man who currently resides as the defensive coordinator for the Saints and has been a trusted assistant in New Orleans for 12 seasons. The only time he left New Orleans was actually to accept a promotion to defensive coordinator and later to head coach with Denver and later Oakland before returning after being fired in Oakland to New Orleans as the defensive coordinator for Peyton once again. Another man on their list is Aaron Glenn. Uh, Aaron Glenn spent 14 seasons in the NFL as a cornerback and was very respected around the league, which is why he ended up in coaching. It took him a few years before he started coaching, and he actually started with Cleveland as an assistant defensive backs coach. He quickly moved on to New Orleans, serving as the defensive backs coach under his former defensive backs coach, ironically, Dennis Allen. Um, the only reason he left New Orleans was he was looking to move up in the coaching world. And it seems that his 1 year as a defensive coordinator under Dan Campbell in Detroit has achieved just that. He's receiving interviews with other teams, whether it be New Orleans, Chicago, and a few other places that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. I honestly think Aaron Glenn might be the inside candidate to take this job because they believe they could retain Dennis Allen as the defensive coordinator while also getting Glenn, who might be actually a year ahead of being ready to be a head coach. Um, this would be the ideal situation for them because they get to keep an experienced head coach on the staff underneath a guy that they truly believe in on the staff, somebody who's familiar with a lot of the guys on Peyton's staff and could potentially retain most of the coaches that are there in New Orleans right now, which is likely the reason they're looking at Allen as well. Moving on to New York with the Giants, I'm fairly certain that Joe Schoen, the GM that was just hired in New York from Buffalo, is going to target Brian Dable. Brian Dable is the obvious choice here for many reasons. First and foremost is the development of Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is only a few years removed from being a top 10 draft pick and was supposed to be the face of the franchise for the Giants. It hasn't quite panned out that way, but there's still hope for his career being that he's relatively young. Brian Dable, as of right now, is the most noted quarterback developer in the league after working with Josh Allen, who quite frankly looked like he could have been a bust after his first couple years in the league. Once Brian Dable got there, things changed and they changed quickly, which is exactly what the Giants want and are hoping that they get if they sign Dable like I think they will. Ultimately, I think Dable will also be able to woo a veteran backup quarterback in the way of Mitch Trubisky to help him push Daniel Jones to a whole nother level in his career that he otherwise would not have achieved if he was again placed in a situation where he has Mike Glennon behind him, who isn't fooling anybody into thinking that he's a starter at the NFL level at this point. Um, I honestly think Brian Dable is not only the logical choice, he's the right choice. If you have a quarterback like Daniel Jones who has flashed on camera at several points in time, why wouldn't you want to try and harness what he has in physical attributes? He is obviously a mobile quarterback. He is a, a more than enough arm talent to succeed at this level. He just needs the proper scheme and the proper coaching to get him to that level. And I think Brian Dable is the guy that can take him there this season. Moving on to Chicago. Chicago just finally hired a general manager in the way of Ryan Poles, who served in Kansas City under multiple roles for the past 13 seasons. I truly believe that due to Poles being the hire here, immediately Eric Bieniemy becomes the logical choice, despite the fact that they just fired a former Kansas City Chiefs offensive coordinator as their head coach. The reason why I think they will look past the fact that Eric Bieniemy succeeded Matt Nagy in Kansas City is the fact that Eric Bieniemy has led Kansas City's offense to heights that Nagy could have never dreamed of prior to the drafting of Patrick Mahomes. Um, After 4 seasons as the offensive coordinator, Bieniemy has 4 straight AFC Championship game appearances, including 2 straight Super Bowl appearances and 1 victory. He still has the potential to make that 3 Super Bowl appearances in a row. Um, it's no mistake that the offense has been extremely prolific under Bieniemy, who believes in a strong run game to support the pass game and using play action to fool defenses. Patrick Mahomes is obviously a transcendent passer, so I'm not expecting that he can develop any quarterback to that level. But the thing is, Chicago already has a top flight athlete at quarterback in Justin Fields. So hiring Bieniemy will simply give them somebody who gives them a fighting chance at developing Justin Fields into the quarterback that he can become at the NFL level in the right system. Bieniemy also has several connections at the NFL level that could come in handy when it comes to assembling a staff, including many from KC as well. Um, Due to these moves, KC would actually receive an extra 4 third-round picks, which is part of the reason why I think Andy Reid is championing Bieniemy being hired as a head coach after losing polls. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, because why not, right? The Vikings are set to hire Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah as a GM. He spent the last 2 years in Cleveland with Andrew Berry, a man us Eagles fans are fairly familiar with when he spent here in 2019 as the assistant GM. He was immediately hired by Cleveland and immediately went and hired Adolfo Mensa from San Francisco, who was previously working in the football analytics department. This is very key because I think this shows that the Vikings are going to take more of an analytical approach to the 2022 season and beyond. And they're going to look for a younger head coach with more of a modern twist on things when it comes to the way he looks at the game, which is exactly why I think DeMeco Ryans is going to be the man in Minnesota. He obviously has a previous connection with Adolfo Mensa from his time in San Francisco, but I don't believe that that's the only reason why Ryans makes the most sense here. One of the reasons Zimmer is no longer with the team is because the defense consistently underperformed in his era. So basically, I believe that the best option for them is to provide the players on this staff already with a coach who can relate to them. Ryans only retired in 2015. He's a mere 7 seasons removed from playing in the NFL, and he immediately jumped into coaching. He's still very young. He still can relate to his players, which is a big reason why I think the 49ers defense is playing at a level that we haven't seen before. It's because of Ryans right now that the 49ers are still in the playoffs. And if you don't think so, go look at Jimmy G's stats right now. They are horrendous, which is another reason why I think Ryans is perfectly ready to take over a head coaching job, despite the fact that he's been coaching for 5 seasons, essentially. Um, he just took over as a defensive coordinator last season, so he's basically in the same boat as Jonathan Gannon. Yet there's a difference here. Ryans was a leader on the field. He was basically a coach as a middle linebacker when he played for Philadelphia. So it only makes sense that he moves up into a head coaching role in 2022. And I honestly think he'll be successful, especially with a GM that understands that he needs the players to fit his scheme, which I think Adolfo Mensa will. Ryans also will be able to bring several notable names with him as potential offensive coordinators. And I think that could potentially make his hire in Minnesota make all the more sense. On to Denver, my home city. George Payton held great respect for Vic Fangio, so it would have surprised almost nobody if Fangio had returned in 2022. Luckily, Payton realized that he simply was not going to be able to live that down with the fans in Denver. Um, they damn near would have rioted had he left Fangio and Shermer in place. One way or another, we were getting coaching changes, and it ultimately to be looks to be that we will replace the entire staff. I can't say that for sure at this point. Obviously, there are chances that the new coach decides to retain some people that are currently still under contract, although I highly doubt it after what's gone on the past 3 seasons. Granted, you can't blame Vic Fangio for not having a reliable quarterback to lean on, which is a big reason why Teddy Bridgewater ended up here in 2021 and ironically played out of his mind if you look at his statistics prior to 2021 season. However, it wasn't enough. Um, they just dropped too many key games on what in a season that could have very well resulted in an AFC West championship. Um, if you looked at the way the season ended with the Raiders and Chargers having the potential to tie and both make the playoffs, the Broncos really weren't that far off from winning the division, which is funny to say considering they ended up finishing the year out in embarrassing fashion, really, which is why Fangio ultimately is no longer here. I think the man that they're going to ultimately hire, which is probably going to irk Denver Broncos fans, is going to be Dan Quinn. He's a very hot name on the market right now, and for good reason. He led a very successful run at the beginning of his career in Atlanta, and it wasn't only because of Kyle Shanahan, despite what Broncos fans are probably going to think if he is hired. Um, Kyle Shanahan was a big part of it, and he definitely ran the offense without much input from Quinn. But the defense held their own for a long while before the Falcons really managed to hit the skids and eventually fire Quinn. He immediately turned around Dallas's defense, and I think in 2022 he would have a work in progress as far as the Broncos defense right now. Granted, they have a lot of strong defensive back talent. There are very many holes on this defense at this point, and a lot of guys who might end up as cap casualties due to the way their salaries are structured right now. I honestly think that Quinn makes a lot of sense here because most likely what you're going to see is that the Broncos are going to go all in on a veteran quarterback, whether that's Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, or Kirk Cousins from Minnesota. I think they ultimately think that is their quickest path to success in 2022. And Quinn is no stranger to starting veteran quarterbacks as a head coach. In fact, I think he would be more than happy to cater to an Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson when it comes to choosing an offensive coordinator or an offensive scheme and how to run that scheme, much like Bruce Arians did with Tom Brady in Tampa, which has been tremendously successful, in case you haven't noticed. Um, I think Aaron Rodgers, after the way the season ended, is probably done in Green Bay, and I think that ultimately ends up being their number one candidate for the quarterback position here. I think that there's a world where the Broncos ship 3 first-round picks and Drew Lock to the Packers in exchange for Rodgers. And I know you're probably looking at me like I'm crazy after I just said Drew Lock. Don't worry, I'm not saying he's going to start over Love. No, no. He's going to be the veteran, quote unquote, backup behind Jordan Love, who will obviously take over the second Rodgers leaves. Um, I think the Broncos ultimately lean towards a veteran head coach after hiring Fangio so late in his career to be a first time head coach because they know Quinn has suffered through the adversity of what head coach can bring. And they think that he is the type of guy who can handle it once again, especially after the way he handled everything in Dallas in the 2021 season. Um, I honestly think that this is a mistake. Um, Probably like most other Broncos fans. I think Quinn definitely is not the guy. If you really want Rodgers, go hire Hackett. Bring in Getsy as the offensive coordinator. Why they're not finalists for the job and it's just between Quinn and O'Connell, it doesn't really make much sense to me. I don't think O'Connell is the type of guy who is going to lure much of any veteran quarterback here. He has a very small resume in terms of these other hot offensive coaches. And he comes from the Belichick tree originally and then goes to the McVay tree. So he's basically just playing off names and hasn't really done much of anything in the league yet. I don't think he's currently ready to be a head coach. And I think ultimately that's why the Broncos point their compass towards Quinn. Um, Whether or not it is a successful tenure, I don't know. But 3 defensive head coaches in a row is probably going to drive the Broncos fans nuts. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins. General manager Chris Greer, is searching for a new head coach despite winning 19 games over the last 2 seasons under Brian Flores. Um, Word out of Miami is that Brian Flores was hard to work with. That's why he's gone. Um, so the name I'm going to bring up as their potential head coach replacement is probably going to shock some people because he isn't known to be the easiest guy to work with. But that man is actually going to be Jim Harbaugh. I think Stephen Ross knows that after winning 19 games the past couple seasons, he needs a rock star head coach. And Sean Payton, frankly, is not coming walking through those doors. I think the man that makes the most sense is Harbaugh. Stephen Ross once chased Harbaugh before in 2010 and sending the private jet, which, as you might have heard in the past, is the telltale sign that somebody wants to hire you. When they send the private jet, you're probably leaving with a contract, although Harbaugh didn't. He ended up signing with the 49ers and had a very successful run before a falling out with Trent Baalke, who's currently the GM in Jacksonville. Good luck. Um, Led to him being ousted, and he headed back to the college level with Michigan, his alma mater, where he has found success once again. I think that it makes a lot of sense for him to jump back to the NFL level because he has unfinished business. And I also think that he believes that he can build an offense around Tua Tagovailoa that can be successful at the NFL level. I know that's a lot to say, being that Tua has kind of been an up and down player, but he's got the tools to work with. It's just a matter of building an offense around him and his skill set. Whereas it seems coaching schemes in the past have simply tried to make him play to their hand. Um, quite frankly, I think Harbaugh is the one name that will make Miami fans happy and make them realize that they didn't fire Flores for no reason. And they didn't get rid of a coach that another team is most likely going to target right away for nothing. Um, ultimately, I can't say whether or not Harbaugh is successful in his second stint in the NFL, but I like the move. I think if you're going to give up on Flores after what he just produced after 2 seasons, you have to go for somebody who's a big name. You have to swing for the fences. Harbaugh's that guy this season. In Houston, um, this might be the most interesting opening. Last season, they kind of settled on a lackluster candidate. I think that was because they weren't quite ready to target the man that they might ultimately settle on this season, which is ironically Josh McCown, a former Eagles quarterback who basically got his start as a coach on our practice squad, helping tutor other quarterbacks, including Carson Wentz. Um, since then, he actually hasn't had an actual title as a coach. He spent some time on Houston's active roster in 2020, but he hasn't been on a roster or a coaching staff since. Yet he is receiving his second season in a row of head coaching interviews. And this time, he has not only interviewed with Houston, the team that he last played for, but he also has spoke with Jacksonville, who I don't believe has legitimate interest in him, but it might be enough to legitimize the candidacy for Houston. And I think they ultimately do try and hire McCown, which is funny to think. McCown's only 2 years removed from retiring, or basically playing his way out of the NFL, being that he's in his 40s now. Um, but it actually makes a lot of sense. McCown's been running a passing camp since 2003 with his brother Luke and his older brother Randy. Um, he's, in a way, been coaching up his college age son, who also plays quarterback now at the University of Colorado, ironically. Um, and all of these stops, he's been rather successful. He's on record as being a coach, volunteer coach, albeit with a high school his son used to attend in Texas, and he's remained close to the Houston organization. While they have leaked some interest in Brian Flores, I think that's only because they weren't sure that Mccown would be a legitimate candidate once again. I do ultimately think they settle on McCown. Um, it might be a huge surprise, but McCown's got ties to several coaching staffs in the NFL from his time playing for basically every team in the NFL. Um, he definitely could assemble a very veteran coaching staff and be able to succeed early on, assuming the players back the hiring of McCown. Now, if this is just Easterby hiring a yes man, which it very well could be, the players are not going to fall in line, and it quickly will go down the tubes, much like Coley's first season did. Um, although I think there are some pieces there to work with, and I think honestly that McCown has a chance to be a successful coach, although I think that he should go the rungs as many other coaches have and coach a quarterback or two and then maybe run an offense before jumping right into being a head coach. But this is another one of those situations where a team is trying to strike too early rather than too late on a candidate. And I honestly think McCown, one way or another, is going to be a good head coach, whether it's in his first stint with Houston or his second stint down the line with somebody else. Moving on to Jacksonville, which, as I said before, Trent Baalke is still the GM there, so good luck trying to figure that one out. Um, I think the Jaguars realize that they need somebody who can clean up what Urban Meyer so clearly dirtied in Jacksonville. They need an image that is going to bring the fans back, make them want to cheer for the team once again. And what better way to do that than hire Byron Leftwich? No, he did not lead another Super Bowl trip in his second season as offensive coordinator in Tampa. But what he did do was play for Jacksonville early in his career. He has earned fans in the fan base from playing injured several seasons in a row, and he has multiple times developed an offense around the quarterback he was provided. I think that he is the perfect person to build an offense around Trevor Lawrence in 2022 and help him grow into the NFL prospect that we all think he can be. He also has one hell of a running back rotation to work with, which is something of a strength of his after working in Tampa Bay with several different candidates. Last but not least, the Raiders. The Raiders cleaned house after a disaster of an email scandal that showed that John Gruden was a racist and a misogynist, and it didn't get any better from there. Whether it was the Damon Arnett situation, the Henry Ruggs situation, or later on Nate Hobbs also garnering a DUI and a speeding ticket later in the season. However, Rich Bisaccia managed a 7-5 record in just 12 games after the disaster of a start to the season. He deserves every bit of the consideration he's getting at their head coach position. But something tells me that Mark Davis, the way he is looking for a big hire. And that big hire, I think in my mind, is Sean Payton. Mark Davis is going to go all out. He's going to give Sean Payton whatever he wants, including the GM title, should he so choose. And I think that is ultimately the person who the Raiders will pursue the hardest. Whether or not they hire him, I do not know. Maybe they end up sticking with Bisaccia because Peyton turns them down. But I think Peyton's going to be their number one target now that they know he's available, even if it takes draft picks to get him. Well, that's all I've got for today. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more content in the future.